This is a very, very important discussion. If you've ever been a tenant or at some point you found yourself unable to pay rent for a couple of months, there's a word for that. It's called squatting. According to Credit Bureau, TPN, the number of residential tenants squatting is on the rise. So how do we prevent this? And if it is happening to you, what can you do about it? Property analyst Michelle Dickens joining us this morning. Hello to you, Michelle. Good to have you with us on eNCA. I'll tell you why it's such an important conversation. Just a few Facebook groups that I've been on, people saying they've approached lawyers, they've approached the councils. They can't get someone that's renting one of their properties out, and they are legitimate squatters. So how bad is the situation before we talk about what we can do?
Hi, Gareth. So we look at data that's produced by TPN Credit Bureau, and they produce data that looks at how tenants pay their rent on a monthly basis, whether they pay on time, whether they're late, or whether they don't pay at all. Now, when we look at their definition of a squatting tenant, it's a tenant that hasn't paid rent for a minimum of 3 months, entering the 4th month, and remains in the property. So someone who's got a long-term behavior of not paying rent. This is only at the moment 4 out of 1,000 tenants. And at the peak of the pandemic, it rose to 6 out of 1,000 tenants. So the reality is that it's a small number in comparison to the total rental population. Nevertheless, if you're a landlord sitting with a tenant who's sitting in your property for that amount of time and not paying rent, it's going to have a material impact on your property performance and on your yields, obviously.
I'm sure it's going to as well. Also, you've got someone sitting in the property that you can't get out as well, because it's just not a case of someone who's just late in paying and they've made a plan, perhaps they've lost a job, and they've spoken to the property owner saying, look, I've hit a bit of a bad patch, I'll sort it out when I get some money back, and they just won't leave the property either. Legally, what do we do about something like this? Can you talk to that?
So when we look back and we look back at the pandemic, as to your point, where we had high instances of increased unemployment or reduction in income for many employees, translating into tenants, these type of tenants typically at that point in time entered into rental deferment agreements or using the deposit as the rent. And this was because at that point in time we had a restriction on movement. So when we look back at March, April, May of 2020, the legislation restricted tenants from being able to vacate the property because we were all locked up. When those restrictions were lifted, the regulations changed slightly, which said that landlords could go and get a court order for eviction, but that eviction was stayed until the end of alert level 4 and then the alert level 3. As legislation stands at the moment, landlords can go and get an eviction order. The courts must just confirm that it's just and equitable to carry out that eviction order. So landlords are able to approach the court, and your remedy is through the court. Unfortunately, the Rental Housing Tribunal, which is a tribunal set up for both tenant and landlord disputes, and it's a free mediation process, the tribunal itself does not have the authority to issue an eviction order. So landlords are required to go through the court process. And of course, this is a costly process and it's a lengthy process.
Yeah, I suppose there's the problem as well. While there is a remedy in the legal side of things, it could take months. Is that months, weeks? How quickly, in your experience, does something like that generally come to fruition?
So, Gareth, on average, you're looking at a 3 to 4 month process. And of course, what landlords can do is they can start the process themselves. So you start the process by demanding the rent. And you can do this on day 2 after the rent is due. So if the rent is due on the 1st, on the 2nd, you can already make your demand. If you've got a tenant who's in a fixed term lease agreement, say, for example, a 12-month lease agreement, then they are required to be given 20 business days notice to remedy that breach. So you're already a month in before you can cancel the lease. You're then entitled as a landlord to cancel the lease, and if the tenant, and you can cancel with immediate effect. If the tenant fails to vacate the property after you cancelled, at this point they become what is known as an illegal tenant, an illegal occupier. And at this point you're going to need the services of an attorney, and it is a costly process, and many landlords don't have the cash flow at this point, particularly because they've tried to mediate the process out first. So they're months behind in a loss of rent. So the recommendation is to start the process as quickly as possible. and get an attorney involved, because it is quite a technical process.
Yeah, I suppose the problem is you need the money to take them on legally, but you haven't got the money because they haven't paid the rent, and we keep going around in this little circle, don't we? Michelle, just a last comment then from you before I say goodbye as well. Not just the issue of squatting tenants as well, but I see TPN also bringing out commentary on tenants in good standing. Now, those aren't tenants who aren't paying up to 3 months. They're just delayed and late on their payments. I see there's been an increase in that as well.
So tenants in good standing, Gareth, are currently sitting at just over 80%, and it's a slight decline from the last quarter of last year, where it was at 81%. Landlords will be reminded that things like the interest rates have a significant effect on tenants in good standing, and we see a 6 to 9 month lag in this. So as we started to see interest rates going up in November last year, and we've had 5 interest rate increases since that, the last one being 0.75% basis point increase, and taking the interest rate from 7% to 9%. This will have an effect on tenants in good standing. And so landlords should expect to start to see the number of tenants in good standing starting to deteriorate. And to give context, in the global financial crisis, it bottomed out at 71% of tenants in good standing, when interest rates got all the way up to 15.5%. In the last pandemic, we bottomed out at 73.5%, but this was driven by high unemployment. Now, currently, we're sitting with we still have high unemployment, but we have significantly lower interest rates than we had in the global financial crisis. But we are starting to see those interest rate numbers climb.
Yeah, unfortunately so. That's going to hit everyone's bottom pocket, including those that are paying the rent and those who need the rent in order to pay for their properties. Michelle, always good to talk to you. Appreciate your time. Michelle Dickens, property analyst, joining us on eNCA.